Isn't it fair to say that most games these days have their own progenitor, the first of their kind? But isn't it just as fair to say that some of these games evolved to such a point that they outshine their once great and proud forebears? Since the OG deck builder Dominion hit our tables back in the 2008, we have been enamoured by its simple virtue of starting with a particular deck of cards and upgrading it over the course of a game. Well, in the decade plus since, deck building has turned into the little guy that made friends with all sorts of mechanics. Like the +1 at a wedding, they come in all different shapes and sizes. And so, dear friends, I'm your narrator Benji, and this is the 10 best deck building games that have a different mechanic as their dance partner. Before we get started though, there was a certain eligibility criteria in order to be considered for the list. Namely, that deck building be either the most prominent or the joint most notable mechanic found inside the box. And whilst you could be a bag builder or a pool builder, you had to more or less apply the deck building principles of each player starting with the same gear and actively tuning and upgrading it according to your game plan. So, with the unpleasantries out of the way, let's count from 1 to 10. Number 1. Eon's End is what happens when you add some cooperative players versus villain action to today's subject mechanic. The core is of course pure deck building. Start with a 10 card deck and use gathered resources to upgrade as you go. But this added two key things. Firstly, each player has access to some moderate variable player powers, but also the ability to queue up spells and abilities, empowering them in the process. So far, so solid, but it's actually the different bosses you can choose to go up against that really adds the flavour. Each come in with its own deck of mischief and mayhem, meaning you really have to work well as a team to overcome everything they'll throw at you. Number 2. Clank is what happens when you sprinkle some point-to-point movement and dungeon delving into the mix. Now, without the deck building element, this would most assuredly be an old-fashioned roll and move kind of pick up and deliver game, where you each try and get in and out of underground passages with the treasure in tow before the big bad dragon catches up with you and gobbles you up. As it is, the deck building turns that fairly vanilla concept into a thing of absolute beauty that demonstrates a real sense of adventure as you delve as deep as you can before turning back. This was, I think, the first game I played that so clearly demonstrated the versatile and complementary nature of deck building. Number 3. The Quacks of Quedlinburg. Our first and maybe only bag builder sees us teaming up with some pure push your luck chicanery. Trying to concoct the ultimate alchemical creation, you play the titular Quacks, drafting tokens, each with their own different effects when you draw them from the bag. Instead of drawing a fixed number of tokens each round, you continue to draw until you've maximised your available resources or the potion blows up in your face. Like any good push your luck game, this really does get the heart racing, but also complements the game's strategic elements by offering a variety of different tokens to help craft what's in your bag. This is one game that really does offer more depth than at first glance. Number 4. Dice Forge. Now, strictly speaking, the +1 here is simple resource management and drafting, but a word or two needs to be reserved for the dice building, if we can call it that sees you upgrading the facings on your dice as you play. An absolutely ingenious concept that I'm amazed we've not seen more of. The component quality holds up to all this dice forging and really is such an elegant way to apply the principles of deck building into rolling some dice. The fact that everyone gets to do something on each player turn is a real boon to player engagement. And the cards up for grabs give you all the opportunities you need to manipulate dice and gobble up some points. Number 5. Blood Bowl Team Manager. Bet you weren't expecting deck building with area control, were ya? Oh, and the greatest theme of all themes either. Okay, so said theme doesn't exactly bleed through and hit you in the face here, but a quite brilliant push-pull mechanic with who controls the ball is employed, alongside everyone vying to have the most amount of star power present at each of the available matchups during a round. Granted, the deck building only takes place at the end of each round, and strictly speaking you start with different decks, but these two concessions I consider to be bending the rules, not breaking them. This is one part deck building, one part area control, because Nuffle said so. Number 6, Friday. Okay, so I'm taking the mick a bit here by including this by virtue of it being a solo only game. But there's no way this doesn't feel like a different type of deck builder. And if you really want to get pernickety, it's got the pirates mechanic in it. So a game of survival sees you starting with a deck representing how weak ass you are, and as you undertake and succeed at target number based trials, the more you get good at the game called Staying Alive. That being said, this is not the easiest game to win. If it's not the imposed aging mechanism that sees negative cards incorporated into your deck, it's the brutal boss fight at the end with the aforementioned pirates that will really give you a sense of achievement if you overcome all the odds and do the victory dance. Number 7, June Imperium. The newest game on the list sees you using part of your hand of cards as traditional worker placement fodder. Now, on the face of things, there's a lot of places to choose from and take the relevant action for, but it doesn't take much for those choices to dwindle, with everyone vying for spots on the same real estate. So far, so conventional worker placement, but the hook here is that the remainder of your hand is then revealed after all workers have been placed, and then we get more of what you'd expect from a deck builder, gathering resources and doing things with the cards in your hand. Be it playing the political and resource-led game, or going full military and winning conflicts the more primitive way. Number 8, the Taverns of Tiefenthal. The aesthetic successor to the Quacks of Quedlinburg, this time combines deck building with dice worker placement, and sees you playing the landlord of a local tavern. As you would imagine, your job is to employ the right staff behind the scenes to ensure that any visitors have a good old time. Not too good though, eh? Because that normally involves, being escorted off the premises. But once you've drawn who's in your tavern, you then roll, draft and place dice on said employees and patrons in order to produce beer and money to kill surprise, upgrade your deck and your tavern in order to do the things that help you win the game. Man, I'm awesome at describing games. Number 9, Dice Masters. Now I feel pretty clever sneaking deck construction in here, considering how often deck building and deck construction gets mixed up. But seriously though, the construction of the cards you bring might be pretty light, and at its heart it's still a bag building dueling game. I still feel pretty smug right now. There's a bunch of IPs for this one, and they're mostly, if not wholly, interchangeable, but the game itself really does hold up to scrutiny, with your dice acting multifunctionally as both resources and the heroes that you send off to battle. You also have to be very careful how many attackers you commit to trying to defeat your opponent, because as soon as they go unblocked, they go back in your bag. There's definitely more to this one than meets the eye. Number 10, Dail Wild. A legit dungeon crawling deck builder. Apparently so. Okay, the map based elements are pretty light, but I'm also sure this is one of the few deck builders with actual miniatures. We're breaking ground here, ladies and gents, in capping off this list. So you play as animists, and the antagonist is always the same, the jealous and oppressive Khan. One neat little nuance outside of the need to use space and distance to your advantage is the ability to spend the odd resources you may have left over to carry out minor actions, instead of leaving them unspent and wasted. So there was definitely some innovative thinking going on here, even if it isn't the best rated game of all time. And so there you have perhaps not an exhaustive list of mechanics that have been used with deck building, but there was more than enough variety to fill out this here list. Were there any glaring omissions you think should have appeared? Let me know in the comments. Alas, I for one can't wait to see what designers come up with next. However, this video has now ended.